Today I wanted to show how to make a stamen cane. Somebody asked me about that. And you need 2 or 3 rods of white, or any color you want, of course. White, black, red, pink, whatever, filigrana, which is a color encased in clear. So, and then you need some kind of glass cutter. You start out with heating 2 pieces about 1 inch long of this 2 filigrana at the same time. And I'm trying to only heat one spot, bring one spot to a glow, just one part of the filigrana, because you want the overall filigrana to stay stiff and cold, but they have to be hot enough to stick together. So that's why I'm not rotating the filigrana in my hand. Just when they get warm enough, and then you can make them stick together. And with the glass nipper, you cut the rod that you put on there off, and then you want to heat the area in between those 2 rods that you just placed here. So you want to get the original center rod warm, but you also want to get the first cut piece warm, and at the same time you warm the other filigrana you're holding in your right hand. So, and when they're hopefully warm enough, you stick the rod so that it attaches to the center rod and to the one that you placed first, and again cut it off to the right. And that's basically all you need to know. Because you continue doing this and you go all the way around the center filigrana, and be prepared that maybe the one rod that you hold in your left hand will break off at some point. That just happens sometimes, and you can either punty up to something different, or you can punty up to a mandrel, or you can take the same rod and punty up. And if you don't have a glass nipper, you can melt the filigrana that you're holding in your right hand off instead of nipping it off, but it just takes a lot more time to do that. And then also you don't have a clean end or clean beginning that you would place on the left hand side, so it gets a little bit messier if you do that, but it's not impossible because not everybody has a glass nipper. Oops, see, there is exactly happening what I said would happen, might happen. So you just grab this thing with tweezers, and if you have, let me see, we have a clear rod. Clear is a little bit stiffer. Just keep this warm and heat. Oops, you have to be careful that your tweezers don't get too hot, because they will stick to the glass. So you heat the tip of your clear rod, or whatever you're going to use as a punty, on your left hand side, and stick it there to the left. That way you just have to make sure that this doesn't flop around. I have to adjust my flame because I just turned my concentrator on when I started this video, and the flame takes a little bit to adjust. So, and you can do this with any color filigrana. I always prefer filigrana that have white in the core. So for example, if you wanted to make turquoise stamen, I wouldn't use just the turquoise glass encased in white, but I like the white encased in transparent turquoise and then encased in clear. It just has more depth. When you come to the end of this gather, you just have to judge whether you can place, whether you have enough room to place one more stripe or 2 more stripes. And it doesn't have to be very symmetrical, because this can be used for stamen, for flowers, or you can use it for fish, for jellyfish, or just for abstract figures. So I'm going to place 2 more in here. And then if you want to get really fancy, but I want to save you the time, not do that, because the idea is pretty much there. If you want to get really fancy, you can make a second round, just adding more filigrana around this initial blob here, and it gets a little bit difficult to keep track of where you've already been. I've done that several times, and I always lose track because you think, it's easy, you just make one more round on the outside, but it just it's more difficult than you think. But it doesn't matter as long as you have a nice big blob there, and you can pretty much know, being in the center, that your punty to the left is kind of centered, then you know that you've got it right. So now I take another clear rod, and let me see whether I can point this at you, at the camera. There you see what this is going to look like. So you keep this warm, and again you melt enough clear for the punty on the right. And the most important thing here when you punty up with a clear rod or handle to the right is that you make sure that you have all the filigrana pieces, these inch-long filigrana pieces, that they are touched by the clear, because otherwise if you melt this and the filigrana haven't touched the clear punty, they might pull backwards, and that's the same actually would happen on the left hand side. And this is why I'm going to take off that punty on the left and reattach it, because right at this point it's only attached to one or two of the filigrana rods. So if you get a nice big blob here on the right, and then you just kind of push it onto this and just kind of make sure that you go all the way out like this, so that all filigrana are connected. And while you allow this on the right hand side to cool off and get stiff, it's still wobbly at this point, put some heat on the punty on the left and melt it off, and flip this in your hand and keep everything warm. And attach it to the right. So you have everything connected here. And now all you have to do is allow this gather to melt, and then you pull it out. And that's a very famous saying from Lawrence Stump when it comes to pulling Morini. And he always says, if you think you pulled it too thin, you pulled it too thin. If you think you pulled it just right, you still pulled it too thin. So you don't want to get this stamen cane too thin, because you don't know what you're going to use it for. If you make a bigger flower, you want a bigger stamen cane, or if you want to use this like inside of a quark, you might want it bigger than just 2 millimeter. And you can always pull anything smaller afterwards. So let's say you pulled your stamen cane maybe 4 or 5 millimeter, and then you want to make a tiny flower and you want a small stamen cane, you can pull it out from that 4 millimeter initial cane. Whenever you work with clear like this, you want to make sure that your torch is adjusted right, because very often, especially for people who have just stepped up from a hothead, they might have too much propane, and then your clear is going to get these dark gray streaks on it, and oftentimes you can't melt that off again. It's just going to make your clear dirty. The nice thing is when you have these big clear blobs on the edges, because you might notice from past experience that when you pull something like this and you have a gather and you pull it out and you pull it a little bit like dog bones with the thicker ends that you then have to throw away. But if you have clear there and you pull out your dog bone ends, then the dog bone ends will be just clear and not have any of the filigrana in it, and that way you get full use of your cane. Okay, this is starting to feel good, and we all know that that white gets clear when it gets hot, but I'm not sure about the white in filigrana because that doesn't go clear. It just stays white. You can see it. So I think that's a different type of glass or so that they use to make these with. Okay, I would take this out of the flame now and pull over my lap, but since I want you to see what I'm doing, I'm gonna pull it here on the table, which is a little bit more difficult because I've got all kinds of things standing around and preventing my arms from going where they have to go. But and you can see what I mean when I say dog bones, right? And it's getting stiff now, so I'm holding it a little bit different so I can pull harder, and I get a little bit thicker and a little bit thinner pieces, which is exactly what I want. I don't want this necessarily to be all the same thickness like I would with the stringer. Now what you can do, if you have a lot of filigrana left here on one side, in the dog bones, you can actually heat that before you cut things off and twist it and pull it in the flame, and that way you get kind of a nice piece of like a lacy cane. And you don't have to pull very hard, you don't have to twist very fast because there are so many white stripes in here. You basically just have to do a slight rotation, and this way you're not wasting the edge or the glass that you still had at the end there. And if you have the same kind of dog bone on the other side of your cane, you can do it there too. But let me see, I'll flip it over, see, and have it here. Oh, see, that got too cold, and that was kind of predictable. So you can only do this on one end usually, because by the time you're done the other end has gotten too cold. So pick the end that has more usable twisties in it. And that's how to make a stamen cane. And then part 2 of the video will be how to use the stamen cane.